And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce, I'm going to start by introducing Amelia. So Amelia is going to be speaking first. Amelia is, well, I know Amelia as a board member of the Regional Parks Association, which I sit on as the executive director of the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. And I have gotten to know and appreciate her over the last few years. She is a volunteer with the East Bay Regional Park District's History Archives. She is a tremendously knowledgeable person. She's written a book about it, and I think she's working on a few more books at the moment, which I can't wait for her to publish, and we can see them. She's a former engineer and research associate for the UC Berkeley Space Sciences Laboratory, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and the Lawrence Hall of Science, which I didn't know until I read her bio. And she's also an equestrian and just really an amazing person. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Amelia to start her presentation.
Well, thank you, Glenn, for your kind words. Can folks hear me okay?
You have to turn your camera on.
Okay, turn my camera on, get the technical stuff here. Okay. There goes the camera. How about the screen?
There we go.
Okay, everything good?
Yep, perfect.
All right. Well, thanks once again. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share some of the wonderful history that I've been immersed in for the past 12 years here. This is a huge topic, so I'll only be able to gloss over the surface of the foundational story, the origin story of the Park District, and tell a few stories that you won't hear anywhere else about it. So this is an image of some of our volunteers. Some of these folks are people who are retirees from the Park District. Where have you ever seen an organization where people spend their career there and then they come back as volunteers? This is what we got. And some of us are just local history buffs and authors. If you can see my cursor, Richard Langs there is the author of Tilden, Queen of the East Bay Regional Parks, and a real expert. And I appreciate very much the lovely Brenda Montano, the supervisor of the archives, and Jerry Kent, who you will be hearing more about through this presentation. And while it's on our minds, let me say that if anybody's looking for a career with the East Bay Regional Park District, sign up for Dave Zuckerman's classes at Merritt College. He's teaching Environment 60A, and he gets some great folks. He's a terrific professor and great opportunity for anyone looking for a job. So the East Bay Regional Park District, it is absolutely unique, and it supports property values, gives us a great quality of life here. Perhaps some folks are acquainted with the stewardship department. They've got a couple of experts, Dr. Doug Bell, who is the guy who watches the raptors on the wind turbine areas out that have recently been acquired by East Bay Regional Park District and the East Contra Costa County habitat protection areas. And of course, there's Doc Quack, Dave Rienchi, who is the guy who has all the volunteers protecting shorelines and taking care of the feral cat problem at the Martin Luther King shoreline, Hayward, etc. So let's talk about the origin story of the East Bay Regional Park District. It wasn't always parkland from the Carquinez Strait all the way south to Lake Chabot and farther south to Mission Peak. It was a big struggle and involved a lot of players starting in the 20s. So if you start with the origins of the Park District, you have to start with the origins of East Bay mud. Anthony Chabot was a self-taught French-Canadian civil engineer who was building sluices in the gold country during the gold rush. Then he came to Oakland, where the good citizens of Oakland had fouled all of their drinking water from groundwater wells by about 1860, 1870. So Anthony saw an opportunity to do business, and his first move was to put a water tower on top of Pill Hill in Oakland, pumping the water from Temescal Creek up into the water tank. And that was pretty nasty too, so he decided to improve on it by building Lake Temescal, using Chinese laborers who would drive semi-wild mares around the bottom of the lake in order to compact it. Then he used that same methodology to create Lake Chabot, which was initially called San Leandro Lake. So with Anthony Chabot having the Contra Costa Water Company, his competitors were the East Bay Water Company, the Union Water Company. There were like a couple of dozen of small water companies, and it was Frank Haven's East Bay Water Company that planted all of the eucalyptus trees that are so problematic now from a wildfire standpoint. I like this picture because it shows the employees of the East Bay Water Company wearing face masks like we've been doing for the past several years during the influenza epidemic of 1918. So the East Bay mud customers kept growing in number, and the demand for good water was ever increasing. So with Pardee, George Pardee, who had been the governor, and not Jerry Brown was not the first California governor to step back into a more local position. Pardee put the necessary administrative processes in place to dam the McCollum River and build the dam that was named after him. That was 1929. The very same year, the general manager wrote to the mayors of Berkeley and Oakland saying, how would you like to buy some surplus open space land? There were some problems with that. The citizens of Berkeley and Oakland, there were several hundred of each, did not vote in favor of a bond issue. So that left Pardee with the option of selling to real estate developers, but there was a huge demand for parks. And in order to make it all happen, we had visionaries who planned how to do it. We had huge advocacy from the public, and we had some negotiators. And then we had the New Deal. So let's start with the visionaries. Frederick Law Olmsted Sr., the guy who designed Central Park, the guy who designed the UC Berkeley campus. While he was in Berkeley, he was captivated with the possibilities of the open space in the hills. And he predicted that if parks were built there, it would support property values and bring in lots of tax revenue. So his sons followed in his footsteps. They are known for creating parks all over the country. And they partnered with Ansel Hall, who is a very interesting figure indeed. He was one of the earliest rangers in Yosemite and in Sequoia National Park. He married a very adventurous lady, and they went on the first exploratory missions to places like Monument Valley, Arizona, Zion and Bryce Canyon National Parks in Utah. They were the ones who initially explored these places, and they did the feasibility study. And that's what it looks like. The 1930 report by the Olmsted brothers and Ansel Hall was financed by a gentleman named Irving Kahn, who had a department store in downtown Oakland next to City Hall. It's now known as the Rotunda Building. And Mr. Kahn was a member of the Temple Sinai congregation, and he was an avid hiker. And so he thought it was a great idea when Samuel May from the UC Berkeley Alumni Association suggested that Mr. Kahn donate $5,200, which is big money in those days, to subsidize this feasibility study. And the reservations for parks that were recommended look very much like what our park district is today. So the Committee of 1,000, they had been urging the authorities to turn this into parkland. A real estate deal needed to be done. And we had the president of the University of California, Robert Gordon Sproul, and academics aplenty from all sorts of colleges around town, fraternal organizations, women's organizations, downtown merchants, and the Sierra Club and the Save the Redwoods League. We haven't yet figured out whether any of those 1,000 names were Audubon Society members, but further research is required for that. So let's talk about some of these stakeholders who played a key role. The culture of Sierra mountaineering and packing is older than the Park District. It's older than the 90 years. In the late 1800s, we had folks who were following the example of John Muir and going out there. And some of them were these well-known characters, Duncan McDuffie and Joseph LeConte. As we talk about some of these people, they did great stuff in their lifetime, but some of them did some stuff that wasn't so wonderful, and we'll make note of that as needed. So little Joe LeConte was a founding member of the Sierra Club. He was a professor of mechanical engineering. His father, also named Joseph LeConte, was a believer in eugenics and a racist and bad enough character that the university took the name LeConte off the physics building where I studied back in the day. So little Joe LeConte and Duncan McDuffie were packing buddies and mountain climbing buddies. Duncan McDuffie was a vice president of the Sierra Club, a recipient of the Pugsley Medal for his environmental advocacy, and he was the developer of a number of neighborhoods, the Claremont area around the Claremont Hotel, the North Bray area, and he put in roadways that were more friendly with the terrain and provided lovely views and an opportunity for good landscaping, and unlike the grid that was laid over the hills of San Francisco. But all of those wonderful lots came with restrictive covenants saying that you could not sell to anybody who wasn't a white person. We don't like that anymore, and of course that's been illegal for a long time. The Contra Costa Hills Club was led by Harold French, who was an assayer at the Mint in San Francisco. That was his day job. He had been in the Alaskan gold rush at the Klondike and got really interested in hiking and open space. And he formed a hiking group that in about 1920. And so the Contra Costa Hills Club would clamber all over the open space, and they did not like it when East Bay Mud had put up barbed wire fences and said it's not okay to go there. So Harold French, heaven help us if he had access to email, because he said that he had written 1 million words in support of the Park District, and he did that in such profusion that he was regarded as a nudge, and nobody much cared for his being such a gadfly. He was the first of many gadflies around the Park District. This is a picture of the mayors who were sympathetic to the idea of the parks. And they are looking at a relief map, one of 7 relief maps that were built by workers from the WPA who were headquartered at UC Berkeley and a strange little building, I think, that has been torn down by the stadium at Bancroft and Oxford. And it wasn't known what happened to those relief maps until a few years ago when Ranger Dave Zuckerman discovered one of them in the junk heap in the clubhouse used by the junior rangers in the Tilden Environmental Education area. So Dave and Brenda managed to have them restored by a professional team. They're now the center of the displays at the Environmental Education Center. And when the restoration was complete, Brenda found the grandson of Ansel Hall, Roger Hall, who was one of triplets who grew up in North Berkeley, and he got a chance to come and enjoy his the restored picture that his distinguished ancestor had envisioned. So here we are. We've got the land available from East Bay Mud. We've got the demand for parks, and we've got labor, because by 1933, the federal government was saying, okay, local mayors, local people, let's get this park deal done so that we can base CCC camps and get the New Deal workers going on making the open space into parks. And in order to make that happen, we had to have two key negotiators. The huge advocate for the parks was Major Charles Lee Tilden. And for the East Bay Mud, the leader, George Cooper Pardee. So voters in Berkeley and Oakland wouldn't vote for it. And Pardee didn't want East Bay Mud to operate parks. He said that his mission was to provide water, and he had a fiduciary duty, so he would be quite happy to sell to real estate developers. And he wanted $300 an acre for 10,000 acres, which is $3 million. And of course, the nascent park district had no money. Contra Costa County even backed out of the deal. We originally had 9 cities. You can guess what they are: Berkeley, Oakland, Piedmont, Alameda, Emeryville, Albany, San Leandro. And Richmond and El Cerrito were in Contra Costa County, which was very rural. Contra Costa County was substantially rural until after World War II. So they didn't want the bond issue. So even though the parkland itself was in Contra Costa County, it was not, the voters there did not have an opportunity to vote for it. So let's talk about a possibly apocryphal story about Pardee and Tilden. So UC Berkeley became UC Berkeley in 1873. Prior to that time, it had been at a location in downtown Oakland. But Pardee and Tilden were classmates, and they were friends, they were rivals, and they were both kind of driver personalities. So we have Pardee in the UC Glee Club, and we have Tilden in the UC Band. At that time, there were about a dozen women enrolled at the University of California. So if they wanted to meet women, the men from UC Berkeley would go over to Mills College, which was quite the idyllic setup. And on one occasion, Pardee and the Glee Club got invited to a dance at Mills College, and Tilden and the band did not, so that would not do. So Tilden and some of his bandmates hiked from Berkeley over to Wildcat Canyon, where they found a farmer who was willing to rent them a hay wagon and a draft horse. So they drove back to UC Berkeley, loaded up the wagon with their band instruments, and then they drove the wagon all the way to Mills College. It took them about 2 hours. When they got there, the Glee Club was serenading the women at Mills, and the band guys got out their horns and their drums, and they drowned out the Glee Club. Tilden told that story to his staff, and it was written down by Richard Trudeau, who later became general manager. There's one problem with it, and that's that the Pardee family in their museum say that Pardee was actually a member of, he was the drum major. So perhaps that sort of makes sense. Maybe he got out of being a drum major and joined the Glee Club instead, but we'll never know if it was true or not, or what the Mills women thought of all this nonsense. So here we have a 7-year negotiation. We've got Pardee standing pat on wanting that $3 million, and he's not going to give away this valuable watershed land. And how are you going to resolve it? Earl Warren. Before he became the governor, before he became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, his first job out of UC Berkeley and out of Hastings Law School was district attorney for Alameda County. And in that capacity, since it was only Alameda County voters who were authorizing the park district, the park board wrote to Earl Warren and said, what can we do to solve this negotiation impasse? And Warren came up with the idea of having a pay-as-you-go deal. It would only take 5 years if the park district paid its revenue as it came in to East Bay Mud in order to secure the title. And so with Measure B that was passed in 1934, it authorized the creation of the Park District. It authorized collecting taxes of 5 cents per $100 of assessed valuation on real property. And it elected the first board. We've got August Vollmer, who was the police chief of the city of Berkeley, and he was also a professor of criminology. He's known as the father of police professionalism. We've got Leroy Goodrich, who was an Oakland attorney. Tommy Roberts, in the days when trade unions got a lot of respect, was a well-known labor leader and so beloved that they named Roberts Regional Recreation Center after him. And of course, Aurelia Reinhardt, who was the president of Mills College. With the deal done, the title transferred, the federal government started building CCC camps. Some people ask what the difference was between the CCC and the WPA. The Civilian Conservation Corps was a work program specifically for young men between the ages of 18 and 25 who came from very impoverished communities, typically in the South. They lived in military-type encampments, wore World War I surplus uniforms, and they worked their tails off every day, clearing brush, cutting eucalyptus trees, cutting poison oak. They would be down for weeks at a time with poison oak rashes, and they loved the opportunity. There were reunion groups that continued into the late 1900s. The typical enrollee would serve 6 to 9 months and would gain about 10 pounds, even though they were working every day because they had not been well nourished prior to joining the CCC. And my favorite here and then and now picture is on the Goldenrod Trail in Anthony Chabot Regional Park. The enrollees were not only working in the Lake Chabot area, they were also working in the City of Oakland golf course and elsewhere. It's believed that they built the stone bridge down at the base of the Jackson grade there. And there were segregated CCC camps. There was one on the Fairmount Ridge side of Lake Chabot, and there was also a segregated camp in the vicinity of San Pablo Dam Reservoir. The CCC was run by Harold Ickes, and the WPA was run by Harry Hopkins. They had slightly different goals, but they worked together. The men, and they were typically men, did work together. And you see in this center picture, they're building Wildcat Canyon Road during the late 30s. They also did a lot of work in Redwood Regional Park. If you've never seen Alvarado Park in Richmond, it is a sight to behold. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. We had Italian-speaking recent immigrants who were employed at the Bilger Quarry in Oakland by the Rock Ridge at the base of the California College of Arts and Crafts campus. They did the beautiful work, really idiosyncratic Italian styles, ovens for barbecuing with lions and all sorts of figures. So that's one of their real prized areas. And they built the Temescal Beach House. So we've got the original 5 parks here. The first 3 that were secured with the deal that Pardee and Tilden made were Wildcat Canyon, which became Tilden, Temescal, and Round Top, which became Sibley, and Redwood Regional Park. Tilden went out of pocket because there was a 9-month lapse between the time the district was authorized by the voters and the time the revenue started coming in. Tilden went out of pocket to buy some of the parcels in Redwood Regional Park, like the Redwood Bowl. So the Tilden Beach House, Temescal Beach House, became the first park district headquarters. They had been in rented buildings in downtown Oakland, and Elbert Vail, who was a finance guy from UC Berkeley, moved in as the first general manager. And Tommy Roberts was willing to lend a hand, pitched in. Georgette Morton was one of the hikers who was very annoyed at having to shinny through the barbed wire fences, and she was very glad. She was just called a secretary, but she actually had a full range of duties to run the park district in its earliest years. So the third general manager was Richard Walpole. I'm skipping over the second, who was Wes Adams, who was kind of a caretaker during World War II. Richard Walpole was an avid golfer. He's a tall guy. He was all about recreation. And he went to Griffith Park in LA and said, look at the money we can make by having a merry-go-round and having steam trains and having pony rides. So there were pony rides in Tilden and in Roberts. And eventually the steam trains had to be moved from Redwood Valley and Redwood and up to their present location at Lomas Cantadas at the top of Tilden. We've got Austin Dunn in this period of time. Austin Dunn is shown there with the golf clubs while the heavyweight champion Joe Louis is playing, and that's Walpole in the middle. Austin Dunn is a revered figure because he gave his life to attempt to save another employee who had been in an electrocution accident near the Tilden golf course. And you'll notice that in this group of employees, you've got Asian people, you've got Black people. The park district was always pretty egalitarian in its employment practices. And it's believed, Dave Zuckerman's been researching this, it's believed that Austin Dunn discovered the park district and discovered the East Bay by being a CCC enrollee. It's a great history, and his son, Larry, had a 40-year career with the Park District as well. It was not initially part of the Park District narrative, but the employees remember the Dunn family, really wanted to revere them, and the Dunn Trail in Redwood Park is named after Austin. So now we have the fourth general manager, William Penn Mott, who is a pretty well-known name. He was a guy who went on to fame. He was a landscape architect, and as the park director of Oakland, he invented children's fairyland, which Walt Disney saw and said, what a great idea. I think I'll create a scaled up version of that and call it Disneyland. And Maude apparently was not resentful of Disney stealing his idea, and he valued his relationship with him and was always very inventive, very relentlessly upbeat. Those who knew him said that Mott was always very upbeat, but he had his opinions as to how things were supposed to go, and sometimes they did not correspond very well to what other people wanted. Let's see, here we go. He was a UC Berkeley guy, Children's Fairyland, Disneyland. And in 1962, East Bay Regional Park District hired Mott away from the city of Oakland, and he stayed until Ronald Reagan made him director of the state parks, and eventually, as president, Reagan made him the head of the national parks. So one of the things that Mott did to reinvent the park district was to hire these two guys, Hewlett Hornbeck as head of land acquisition, and Richard Trudeau, who started as the head of public information and made his way into becoming the general manager himself. And with Hewlett Hornbeck, he really started buying up open space like crazy. Hornbeck was a melanoma survivor. The doctors gave him 5 years to live. He said, well, if I've only got 5 years, let's go hiking, let's acquire some land. And he ended up living to a ripe old age in Contra Costa County, where there's a trail named after him. So these are some of the lands that were acquired. Even after Proposition 13 was passed, the acquisitions continued. Now, here's a story, two narratives that you're not going to hear very often. The picture shows the last hurrah of the highly educated, energetic, brilliant faculty wives who did not have to have a job outside the home in the 60s and 70s. This is a generation that gave us Sylvia McLaughlin, who was the wife of an engineering professor who's got a building on the UC campus named after him. And she saved the Bay, she and Esther Gulag and one other lady whose name escapes me. So these people with the picket signs are primarily from the California Native Plant Society. They are fresh from the victory of defeating William Penn Mott on the question of whether he would shrink the Tilden Botanical Garden and replace it with a 300-acre arboretum in Grass Valley, which they thought was a real bad idea. They were big fans of James Roof, who was the director of the Tilden Botanical Garden for a long time. And they wanted the Park District to acquire the Huckleberry Botanical Preserve. There were problems with that because there were lands in private ownership on both ends of it. The upslope owner wanted to bulldoze. He bulldozed a bunch of leatherwood, and he wanted to build a swimming pool. And that would not have been good. You'd have had the drainage from the swimming pool with the chlorine in it damaging the native plants. And so these ladies got very upset when the owner went in with a bulldozer. They got Glenn Seaborg to show up with them and be their spokesperson. And the story was, after this picketing, the chairman of the board in those days, Fred Blumberg, said, okay, we'll call a board meeting for Friday at 4:30. And the ladies got on their phone tree, they got people to show out in force, and they presented each of the 7 board members with a homemade huckleberry tart in a handmade basket. They got their vote. But there's another side to the story. In the town of Canyon, there was a family named Avellino. They were a multiracial family. They were hippies. They had horses. They had chickens. They had a lot of kids. And they had 12 acres. And the park district wanted to buy that acreage to add to Huckleberry. So this story comes from Wendy Avellino Merchant, who is a lifelong Canyon resident and works as a teacher's aide in the school and a real estate agent. So according to her, when she was 13 years old, she was home alone on a couple of occasions, and a man in an unmarked pickup truck was trespassing and snooping around. She told her dad, and her dad thought it was a child molester after her. So he drove the guy off with a shotgun. Turns out it was Hewlett Hornbeck, and there was a big outcry, and the citizens of Canyon backed them up, but the park district used its right of eminent domain to seize the Avellino family home in 1978. It's a very sad situation. It is now pretty well recognized by sociologists that when low-income people are evicted, they have lasting ill impacts, and the family was split up and went living in different places, and it was very traumatic. Nowadays, the park district is more judicious about using eminent domain, and they say they will only work with a willing seller. But this was a shameful episode. They were the only non-white family for miles around. So we're moving ahead here. We've still got plenty of acquisition going on. Claremont Canyon was put together from many, many private parcels that had been given out by the San Francisco Chronicle to subscribers some time before. You'll recognize some of these park names: Point Isabel, which is the popular dog walking area, the Vasco Caves in East Alameda County, which have wonderful indigenous petroglyphs from ancient times. Oyster Bay was a landfill that got landscaped and made into a bike park and a disc golf park. Here's another story you won't hear elsewhere. The lady in the right side picture is Helena Mazziarello, who is the architect of the Sibley Labyrinths. And I'm going to tell you the story from Jerry Kent, who I absolutely love. And this is one of my favorite stories. So about 1985, Jerry, who was then the assistant general manager, in those days they only had one, he got a call from the park supervisor, Ed Leong, and Ed said, well, Jerry, you're not going to believe this, but some people have created this rock labyrinth down at the bottom of one of the old Kaiser sand and gravel quarry pits. And Jerry said, well, you're going to have to clean it up, Ed, because the rules are that you can't have public art without a permit. So Ed said, okay. And he called Jerry back in a couple of days. He says, you know, I'm really hesitant to disassemble this labyrinth because the public absolutely loves it. And Jerry said, well, I'm an old softy. Go ahead and leave it in place and we'll just look the other way. So that Sunday, Jerry and his wife Lola went to church at the Lafayette Presbyterian Church, where Jerry is a deacon. And he was approached by the youth pastor. The pastor said, Jerry, I'm really excited about this new labyrinth that you've built in Sibley Park. How about if we have our youth group get permission to be there overnight on Easter weekend, and we can have a midnight prayer service at the labyrinth and then pack up the next day. And Jerry said, well, okay, I think we can arrange that. So he got permission and got somebody to unlock the gate and escort them in. But the very same morning they were supposed to go in, Jerry gets another call from Ed Leong, and he said, Jerry, you're not going to believe this. Some Santeria worshipers have been doing their devotions down in the middle of the labyrinth, and they've slaughtered a chicken there and left a bunch of coins and other candles and other devotional items. And Jerry said, well, Ed, you're going to have to clean it up. The Presbyterians will be there at midnight. So the 1990s, Jerry was very active in engaging with the local Ohlone people, and Beverly Ortiz started out as a naturalist. She got her PhD, and she was the person who started organizing the annual gathering of the Ohlone peoples at Coyote Hills. But the really big thing that impressed the staff of the East Bay Regional Park District was, of course, the firestorm of 1991. Everyone who lived here then, has some firestorm story. And the Park District people were the first to respond when the fire broke out there above the Caldecott Tunnel on Buckingham. And they put the fire out, and De Rosario was the lieutenant in charge, and he went around and warned the neighbors. Then they handed it off to the City of Oakland Fire Department. So the next morning, the Park District came back to help with the mop up, and suddenly the fire flared up again. At that point, it became all hands on deck, and district crews came and did what they could. About 22 people were trapped behind the fire lines, including 9 of the district employees. There were Oakland firefighters, there were volunteers, and there were local residents. And after they got out, they went over to Orenda, had their lunch, and then turned around and fought the fire some more. And Jerry Kent, who was the AGM, had experienced firefighting in his youth in Oregon, and he came and he pitched in too. Frances Heath, the Temescal Park supervisor, set a sprinkler on the top of the historic beach house, and she saved it. And she also got all the money out of the safe and the financial records and told all of her staff, well, boys, I saved your paychecks. She drove around and warned people in Upper Rockridge and did what she could too. So they had a reunion. A lot of those people promoted to upper management. De Rosario is a sitting member of the Park District Board. So moving to the present, we've got land that's been more recently acquired for the coming Deer Valley Regional Park in the Brentwood area. The Roddy Ranch Golf Course has been opened. We've got the Judge John Sutter Shoreline Park at the base of the Bay Bridge to try to connect all of the land along the Bay Shore, along the Bay Trail to be parkland. McCosker family donated a chunk of their historic property to add to Sibley. We've got Thurgood Marshall, which is still undergoing remediation. It will be open. And you know about Point Malati, which was acquired with quite a bit of drama and kabuki theater, and other parkland will be coming online too. And there's still some unspent acquisition money. So these are reference books that might be of interest to you. We spoke of the Ansel Hall and Olmsted Brothers report. There are 2 books published by the district on its history. One is Vision Achieved by Mimi Stein of the Bancroft Library, and Living Landscapes, which was for the 75th anniversary 15 years ago. And on East Bay Mud, they've got Its Name is Mud, their official history, and The Water King, a biography of Anthony Chabot. So if there are any questions in the chat, I'm sure that Glenn will be happy to relay them. And should you wish to buy my books, that's what they look like.
And please do buy them because they're a lot of fun. All right. Well, I think we're gonna, I mean, I don't see any questions, but we could take a couple of questions. We're a little behind schedule, but I'll try to be brief with my short presentation. Is there any questions before I move on? Looks like I don't see any questions. All right, then I'm just gonna start, and if you come up with questions, put them in the chat, and we will answer them at some point. So it's my pleasure to sort of bridge the gap of oops, wait, I grabbed the wrong presentation. Sorry, that's the one you saw already. Stop share. You need this one. Ah. So it's my pleasure to do the. I'm not going to cancel this while I do my introduction here. Is to talk about the partnership between the East Bay Regional Park District and the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. And so I have a very short presentation here, and I will keep it very brief because we have sort of transitioning from the history to the partnership to, and then we're going to hear from a conservationist who works for the district. So about some bird conservation work that she's doing. It's very exciting. And so now I can share, sorry. There we go. Some of you may recognize this location. This is Elsie Romer Sanctuary. It is actually named after one of our kind of key leaders, Elsie Romer, who was an Alameda resident and as a mover and shaker behind a lot of the work that the Golden Gate Bird Alliance has done. And when as Amelia mentioned, I've scoured through the Gulf. We have issues of the Gulf dating back to 1918. And I could find no mention of the East Bay Regional Park District from 1919 until 1935. That's when I stopped looking. And I know it's in there later. But one of the things I did notice was that a lot of these places that are now parks were destinations for the early Golden Gate Bird Alliance. Right, we were founded as the Audubon Association of the Pacific, and this is a page from the April issue of the Gull in 1926, and it describes a field trip to what is now Guerin Regional Park. And to me, there are a few fascinating things about this story. I should share it to our on our webpage because it is pretty interesting. One of the things that's interesting is that the group of intrepid folks, they actually got to this place by public transit. And on their way back, they missed the last train, and so they had to they hitchhiked and got home. A truck driver dropped them off at a trolley station that was open. The other thing that's interesting is how some of the bird names have changed. One of the sightings was a pileated warbler, and I had no idea what a pileated warbler is. But for those of you who have concerns about changing common bird names, know that these names have been in flux always. And what was once known as the pileated warbler is what we know as the Wilson's warbler. So it was not named for a person originally. One of our earliest real engagements with the East Bay Regional Park District was around the purchase of Point Pinole. And the Golden Gate Bird Alliance, then it was Golden Gate Audubon by then, actually raised $100,000 to purchase a portion of Point Pinole. And that was a really, I mean, 1972, that was a fair amount of money still for a property. And ever since then, we have used it we have participated in the protection of Point Pinole Park. Here are some participants in our eco-education program, planting native plants along the shoreline. This has been a long standing program. We're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary of this program. Another place where we've been really involved with the East Bay Regional Park District is at Martin Luther King Shoreline. I mentioned Elsie Romer, but Elsie was the protege of Janaea Kelly, who was actually our board president in the 20s. And Junea lived in Alameda also. Both Junea and Elsie are Alameda residents. And they really were very much behind the desire to protect what is now Martin Luther King shoreline. We worked very hard to protect all of Bay Farm Island, which we were not successful at. But in the end, uh, the property that is now Martin Luther King shoreline, which was owned by the Port of Oakland, was transferred to the Park District on a 100-year lease. And it is in part because of the work of these pioneering women. Today, the Martin Luther King shoreline is one of our most frequently visited places. Our eco-education program brings Oakland students there. All of our educational programming brings hundreds of people there every year. Here's a field trip out at Arrowhead Marsh. One of the sort of the behind the scenes things that probably most people don't know is that, Golden Gate Bird Alliance has over the years, participated in a number of lawsuits to stop environmental harms. Probably the most famous one that we've been involved in is the Altamont wind farm lawsuits, and those have been kind of ongoing ever since. But what most people probably don't know is that when we settled those lawsuits, the mitigation funds do not come to the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. They go to the East Bay Regional Park District, and therefore are able to make a great difference for birds, because of course the East Bay Regional Park District is the largest landowner in the East Bay, and it's the largest owner of critical habitat for birds. Another example of that was the lawsuit over the Swan Depot on Swan Lane at Martin Luther King shoreline. And this was something that actually Elsie Romer discovered, that they were being naughty and filling wetlands that they weren't supposed to. They didn't have a permit to fill. And she, galvanized the Golden Gate Bird Alliance, the Sierra Club, Save the Bay, and we filed a lawsuit and we won. And part of the settlement was that the port had to set aside a lot of money to build what is now called New Marsh, which you see here. And so that was really a critical moment in the future of San Leandro Bay, was having the presence of this very large marsh restoration project. And in fact, some of the more recent work has also been done as the result of settlements of lawsuits, some of which we were involved in. One last little piece that just to give you a sense of how important the East Bay Regional Park Districts are to us. Special thanks to Rusty for his magical work at trying to pull this data out of eBird. So this is eBird data from East Bay Regional Parks from 2022. And so there were nearly 40,000 birders using eBird in East Bay Regional Parks in 2022. And you can see here, these are our top parks. So Tilden is almost 6,000. Martin Luther King Jr. There's a label missing there. Sorry. Martin Luther King Jr., Miller Knox Shoreline, Redwood, Reinhardt Redwood. These are all parks that are seeing thousands of birders every year. Tilden had 16 birders every day of the year on average. And that's just the birders using eBird. So, I mean, as you probably know from your own, like I go out birding and I mostly use eBird, but I don't always. Sometimes I just want to enjoy the birds and I don't really want to have to track them down. And so, probably only a third of birders actually are using eBird on any given day. So the real numbers are probably, 3 or 4 times higher than this. So these are clearly, critically important places for birds, and we are thrilled to work with the East Bay Regional Park District to ensure that our parks are safe for birds. and to bring people, our members, and you out to see the birds in the parks. So we are very grateful for this long-standing partnership, and we hope for centuries to come. Just as Amelia noted, the next step in this process is Point Melody at Richmond, which it hasn't closed yet, so it's not a done deal, but it's been approved everywhere. We're involved in lawsuits that help make it possible for the parks to acquire this. We advocated for money to be set aside for the purchase of the park. So we're really very thrilled that this is about to happen, and we can't wait for that park to open in the future. That is my piece. So, oops, wait, stop share. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Natalie Reeder. Natalie is a wildlife biologist at the East Bay Regional Park District. She received her master's in ecology and systematics at San Francisco State University, and her bachelor's in integrative biology at UC Berkeley. We maintain this tradition of UC Berkeley's engagement with the East Bay Regional Park District, and we're really thrilled to have you all here. So I'm gonna let you take.
Thanks so much, Glenn, and thanks to Amelia also for that incredible presentation. It's so important to know where we came from so we can understand why we are the way we are and what we can do going forward. So I'm going to share. Here we go. So as Glenn said, my name is Natalie Reeder. I'm a wildlife biologist in the stewardship department, which Amelia mentioned in her presentation. And I'm really happy to be with you here today to talk about bird stewardship in particular. I do have my email here on this slide. Feel free to reach out to me for any reason. We love getting interesting observations, questions, whatever you might have. It can sometimes be hard because the park district is so vast to know who you should talk to. So feel free to send anything you have to me. And if I can't help you, I can find you the right person. So I'm sure most here are pretty familiar with the district, but I think it's a great follow-up to the history that Amelia gave to really show from the original Oakland and Berkeley Hills parks just how much the district has grown and how much land we own and manage. So we have over 73 parks. We're always adding more. We have over 126,000 acres, and we're always adding more. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with the shoreline. And we do have parks sprinkled along the shoreline. And you can actually, from this map that does also include non-East Bay Regional Park District public lands, you can see that the park district really owns and manages the majority of the public open space that persists in the East Bay. So, of course, again, none of you are strangers to the incredible diversity of birds that we have in the East Bay. And we have that diversity partly because we also have a diversity of landscapes. So the East Bay, the park district extends from the shoreline to the far East Bay and everything in between. So we have forested hills, we have redwood forests, we have alkaline meadows, we have some of those really baking hot hills in the far East Bay, and remnant shoreline marsh habitat as well on the margins of San Francisco Bay. And we do a lot to protect birds. Birds, of course, have always been a favorite among conservationists. They're very visible. Anybody can go out and see birds and observe their behaviors. And so they have always been and will continue to be a focus of our conservation efforts. Amelia mentioned Dr. Doug Bell, who's the wildlife program manager in the stewardship department. And for, as I just said, those 126,000 acres, we have 4 biologists. Doug Bell is one of those. He's the manager of the rest of us, the 3 other biologists for the park district. We do like to say that there's plenty of other people on staff who have a biology background. A lot of our naturalists and rangers do. So it's certainly not just the 4 of us, but we're the 4 that are really dedicated to wildlife work. And Doug works primarily on raptors. He's especially beloved of golden eagles, which this is a young one of, and prairie falcons are his favorite. He also worked on a study this year on burrowing owls, where they were putting transmitters on the owls. I think they ended up catching about 30 of them to study, where they're going. We thought we were seeing a drop. We weren't expecting that he would catch as many as he did. So it's good news that he got a fair number of them. He also does banding and sometimes also tracking backpacks on golden eagles, nest surveys. We have a golden eagle monitoring team that keeps track of all of the breeding pairs throughout the East Bay, and their nests and their nest success. And then, of course, you can't have the birds in isolation. They are living in an area with lots of hazards, and one of the major ones for raptors is the wind turbines in the Altamont Pass. So Doug has done extensive research on the impacts of the wind turbines on eagles and other raptors. We also do a lot of direct management. So we also monitor and research our shorebirds, but there's a lot more active management involved in our shorebird populations. So Amelia mentioned Dave Renchie, also known as Doc Quack. He has worked for decades to establish and maintain what we call Turntown, which is a man-made island at Hayward Shoreline that is kept appropriate for least tern and snowy plover breeding through a lot of work with staff and volunteers. It requires vegetation management to keep it looking like a natural sandy shell beach. We try to control public access to the area so the birds are not disturbed. Predator management is required. The volunteers will stay out there for hours, and some of you might be volunteers on this program. Volunteers will be out there for hours scaring predators away and documenting predator presence and impacts to the nesting colony. We have to be thinking about sea level rise. You can see here on the edge of the island, just from wave action, that there was erosion to the point where the edges of the island were pretty vertical. And so if you had a little least tern or snowy plover chick that went to the edge, they might fall in and not be able to get back out. So there's been some remediation done to solve that problem, but I think this picture was taken when this wattle barrier was placed to protect the chicks from getting to that precipitous edge. And then there's just a lot of monitoring, counting chicks, counting birds, and keeping track of how they're doing out there. And they're doing well. We've had a good number of nests that have successfully fledged chicks pretty much every year since early on in the island's life. This graph also shows that early on, it's possible that the numbers were suppressed because of predators, maybe preventing nesting in the first place or predating nests after they were established. And so predator control was started, and immediately after, the numbers started going up. And there's a fair amount of variation. I talked to Dave about some of these more interesting peaks, and in 2012, there was a burrowing owl or multiple burrowing owls who were predating the colony in Alameda. So many of the pairs of least terns from that area came down to Hayward that year. So they added to the existing colony and just bumped the numbers up to kind of an unusual level. 2018, they had sort of an outbreak of vegetation on the island that wasn't, that might have popped up after they did their vegetation management. And so there wasn't as much available area for the birds to nest. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I manage, which is the free roaming cat policy. And you might all be aware that cats are a huge threat to birds. It's estimated that they kill close to 2 billion a year in, I think that's actually, can't remember if that's a global or a national number. I think it's just in the United States. And second is collisions with buildings. Just a quick side note, we are working to comply with the Bird Safe Buildings Ordinance that I know your organization was part of getting passed. I previously worked to ensure compliance with the San Francisco Bird Safe Buildings Ordinance. So we have some experience with that. We're trying to install patterned glass in areas where it's necessary, and doing our best to make some improvements so that our buildings aren't hazardous to birds. But moving back to cats, we have a free roaming cat management plan that I've been managing since I started with the Park District 2 years ago. And this all started in 2020. There was outcry over the lethal control of cats. And the cats were being lethally controlled primarily around Turntown in Hayward because of the extremely sensitive nature of that nesting site. And we didn't want to lose any birds to cats. But then, you know, people love cats. I love cats. And people were not happy when they found out that there was lethal control going on. So the board issued a moratorium against lethal control of cats and requested an update to our original policy. And that policy was updated in 2021. And then we've been implementing the policy for the last 3 years. We do have a predator control contract with USDA Wildlife Services, which is a federal sort of wildlife conflict contractor. And they they do not engage in lethal control of cats. They do lethally control other predators like raccoons, skunks, foxes, but not cats. And we are doing all of this, you know, it's potentially significantly more effort to find other methods other than lethal control. But it's really worth the investment because we have these priceless bird resources and mouse resources that can be really devastated by cat predators. So California least tern, western snowy plover, black skimmers that have also been nesting. All 3 of those species, terns, plovers, and skimmers, have all been nesting together on Turntown Island in Hayward. Burrowing owls, Ridgway's rail are very susceptible to predators and are an endangered species, and salt marsh harvest mouse. And you'll notice almost all these species, except kind of the burrowing owl, are shoreline species. So they're not only being threatened by cats, they also already have less than 2 or 3% of their historic habitat, since most of the marsh has been filled or converted in some other way. And then what is left is under threat from sea level rise. So these birds are in a lot of trouble. Even if they're doing somewhat okay now, we know that they're facing a lot of challenges in the future, and it's necessary to do whatever we can to give them a chance to persist. We also recognize that people value cats. They're the most popular pet in the country. And cats are also at risk from living outdoors. They have shortened lifespans. They're exposed to injury and illness and predation. They get pregnant early. Cats can get pregnant at 4 months of age, and then can get pregnant repeatedly. And you can see from this diagram, you know, one cat can result in way too many cats just from their rapid breeding. And we've had, you know, a few instances where it's really upsetting to park users to see cats, you know, some that have been dumped, some that were born outside, that are maybe injured or sick or even if they're healthy, people recognize that they would rather be living inside being pampered, and it's upsetting sometimes to see them outside, and maybe people are worried that they're not getting enough food, and that's how we end up with people feeding them, which is a whole other issue. We do try to educate people about why they should not feed cats in the parks or abandon their pets. We try to give people contact information for our local shelters so they can responsibly surrender their cats if they can no longer care for them. We're also working diligently to try to secure our trash in the park district. It is a much more complicated issue than you would think, but you might start seeing some of these bear saver type trash cans out and about in the parks where we're trying really hard to contain our trash. It can attract cats. It can certainly also attract other predators of our shoreline birds like crows and ravens and various species of gulls. So that's a really high priority for us, and something that we're hoping to make some progress on here in the next couple of years. We do also have information brochures to educate people about cats and give them some resources to follow. We also train our staff. Full Circle Cats, formerly known as Feral Change, is a really excellent feral cat focused nonprofit in the area. They're very science based. They're very sorry. Well, what I want to say is reasonable. They recognize the realities of feral cats, and they're really interested in practical solutions to solve those problems. So they've been very generous to donate their time over the last few years to train our staff on how to trap cats safely and how to assist us in really launching this new approach to feral cat management. So you're probably all familiar with TNR, or trap, neuter, return. So you trap the cat, bring it to a vet where they're fixed, spayed or neutered, and then you drop them right back off where you caught them. Well, that's not really acceptable to us as a park district, because we don't want the cats in the habitats where they might be impacting threatened and endangered species, and certainly all of our native wildlife, whether it's listed or not. So our new program is called Trap, Neuter, Transferred, or TNT. So we are trapping the cats and transferring them to shelters. We have partnerships that are soon to be formalized with pretty much every municipal shelter in the area: Oakland Animal Services, Hayward Animal Services, Fremont Tri-City, Friends of Alameda Animal Shelter, Berkeley Animal Care, and I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. But they'll take the cats and fix them. If they are kittens, young kittens, or they're a socialized cat that maybe was dumped outside, they will go into pet adoptions. So this is an example of this kitten was found at Ardenwood Farm, and one of our staff members adopted him, and he now gets to live a pampered indoor life. There are also cats that are truly feral. They grew up outside and they missed their socialization window, and they can never really be fully comfortable living in close proximity to humans. So those cats will go into working cat placements, and that can look different ways. This cat was trapped at Big Break and transferred to this adopter who set up a catio where the cats are acclimated. People can certainly keep their working cats in a catio. They're not really working at that point, but people are also, adopters are also able to keep their cats in a backyard, in a barn, in a brewery, a warehouse, whatever the case might be. And the cats are fixed, so they're not going to be making any more cats. They're vaccinated, and they have somebody who's responsible for their long-term care, so that if they do become sick or injured, that person can capture them and bring them to the vet for care. And they're not just simply, roaming around free and not being looked after. So as I mentioned, we are in partnership with all of these organizations to implement this program, and we've been really successful. We've certainly been focusing on the shoreline parks where snowy plover and least tern nest. MLK and Hayward are the two big ones. We've actually taken a lot of cats out of Big Break this year. And, that's our focus because that's where the listed species are, but we're also working in, anywhere where there's cats. In the first year of the program in 2021, we trapped and transferred 60 cats. And that was kind of a bit of a backlog, I think, from before the program was implemented, to make sure that we caught up a little bit. Most of those cats that year came from MLK and Tidewater. And then every subsequent year, we've been doing around 40 to 50 cats transferred out of the parks. And so that went from, this kind of public conflict nightmare where everybody was very angry. Some of our staff were getting death threats. There were people coming to the board meetings very angry. And now we just had this excellent write-up in Oakland-side highlighting our new partnership that was the impetus for that was that Oakland Animal Services formalized their partnership with us. And so we're really hoping that we've found a good balance and a win-win-win for all. I don't unfortunately have any way to tell you whether the birds are effectively being protected because the landscape is very complicated. There are plenty of other predators for least terns. So there's no line that I can put on this graph to say, well, we started this cat program in 2021, and now we're seeing, more least terns or more snowy plovers. It's just too complicated for us to collect any data that would give us that answer. But we do know from studies that a single cat can kill a lot of animals. This is from an Australian study, so some might argue it might not be applicable here. However, the cats are the same, and there are similar wildlife in both places. So a single free-roaming cat that belongs to somebody can kill almost 200 animals a year, and that includes other things like lizards, snakes, mice, etc. But certainly a good chunk of those are birds. And a feral cat can kill something like 450 animals a year. So even though we don't and probably can never really get a cause and effect data showing a cause and effect of this feral cat program, we know that every cat that is removed from the parks is potentially saving hundreds of native animals. And so, as I mentioned, we're really hoping that this is a win-win-win, benefits for people who love their parks and love their wildlife and love cats, benefit for the cats themselves, and then most importantly, in my mind as a wildlife biologist, benefits for the wildlife themselves. And then this is just a plug for some things that you can do. We love your eBird data. We actually use eBird and iNaturalist observations regularly in our management work. If we're wondering where people have been seeing whatever species, we will pull that information from iNaturalist and eBird. So please continue to record your observations. This QR code is for a East Bay Regional Park District iNaturalist project. So you can join the project and your observations will come to us. You can also give us project trust and we'll be able to see obscured points, like if you see a rare bird where nobody else on iNaturalist will be able to see the exact location, we will be able to see it. We also want to really put out a call, and I know you all do a lot of advocacy work and have been long-term partnerships with the district, and some of those efforts have been highlighted already tonight. But I think what a lot of people don't know is that there's really different opinions about how the park district should be managed. And the people that we hear the most frequently and the loudest tend to be fisher people, bikers, and e-bikers, and a lot of people who are doing sort of more consumptive activities. So for people who really value the conservation and wildlife conservation aspect of having these parks in our area, we could use your voices, be engaged with your board member. That's a represents your ward, and some of those are up for election this November. And keep an eye out for issues that might affect birds and other wildlife in your area. And then if you do have a cat, please keep them safely contained. You can do that by keeping them indoors 100% of the time, which is a great option. If you take them outside, maybe it could be on a leash or harness. And catios are also a great option. So that is it. I would be happy to answer questions, and hopefully we have some time for that because I see some in the chat there.
We don't have a lot of time, but we do have a couple of good questions in here. One of them, well, let's see. Well, let's
Oh,
start
and
with.
were people able to see my slides? Now I'm just seeing that people weren't able to.
No, I think it was okay. I think it was just a few
Oh,
people.
okay.
I think it was them, not us.
Okay.
Are the question from Mildred is, are crows and ravens a threat to other birds?
Yes, certainly. I mean, they're very intelligent animals, and they are pretty omnivorous. They will eat anything. There's kind of a famous case in the desert in Southern California where ravens have been moving in because with all the, well, with some development and the development of solar farms, power lines are going in, giving ravens perches, and then they learned that they could eat baby gopher tortoises, which are a protected species. So they learned that if they just peck the shell, they can get to the meaty insides. They will eat anything, and they will certainly take a fluffy snowy plover chick if they get the option. We are seeing an effect that if we have a large, healthy breeding colony, they're much better at defending themselves. All the adults will go up and mob aerial predators, so that certainly helps. But yeah, they will definitely take some chicks.
Yes, I would echo that. That's one of the challenges that our human infrastructure sort of can inadvertently create opportunities for predators that didn't used to exist. And
yeah, and the waste management waste transfer station is very close to MLK and not that far from Hayward, and there are other dump sites and various waste facilities that can certainly attract lots of gulls and ravens and crows.
There's a question: are the predator cats feral?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the parks are well, it's very diverse. Some of the parks are close enough to residences that people's pets are simply leaving their homes and going around and killing wildlife. And then there are also places that are far enough from any residences that it's likely all feral cats. Feral meaning that they just don't have an owner. They could be formerly pets that were dumped. So Hayward Regional Shoreline is an example of that. It's pretty far from residences, so cats that are out there are probably not owned.
There was a question about or a further question about managing unsupervised, feral cats outside of the parks. And I think we'll have to get some experts, and maybe we'll have to talk with Full Circle Cats and get them to come do a joint program with us on.
I would love that.
I think that would be, I'm glad to know that they exist, because I've been looking for that kind of a partner who we could actually work with for good pragmatic solutions. I think that looks like, if I missed any of your other questions, there was a question about turbine blades, and about whether the painting one of them black works. And I think the evidence is that it does significantly reduce collisions for birds, but it doesn't help with bats at all. And that's actually in Altamont, bats are almost a bigger problem these days than birds.
Yeah, and we just had one of the wind farm companies was required to install a Modus tower, which is basically like an automated radio tracking tower, specifically to monitor bats that are regularly killed in the wind farms. So and we've agreed to host that tower. We're working on finalizing the agreement and getting the tower installed. but we'll be doing some bat monitoring through that. Hopefully we'll get more towers installed as well. And then those can also pick up birds as long as somebody's tagging the birds with a Modus tag.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time. We went a little over, but thank you all for sticking with us. As if you missed any of this, we will be posting it on Monday on our website. If you go to the section on the speaker series that says past events, and just click there, and you'll be able to watch this again. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see some of you in person next month in San Francisco, and otherwise we'll see you online. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you all.